Hello. Today we're talking about the Circle Jerks album, Wonderful. But first, I started doing this podcast as an audio only podcast in 2017 with a number of breaks for various reasons. One of the reasons I've taken breaks is because of anxiety. I'd say a good amount, maybe a little more than half of the people that have been on here are people who I know in real life. Yet when it comes time to, message someone to come on and talk, I hesitate. And sometimes, I'll have an idea to have a guest on here. It'll take me a month and a half from the moment I think of them as a guest to me actually messaging them. Only one person has ever flat out said no. Usually 100% of the people, say yes. And, the one time someone said no, it was fine. I didn't, lock myself in the house and walk around sobbing hysterically or anything. And, there's been others who just, there was a communication breakdown or scheduling thing, and then we just kind of lost touch. And trying to get better at those moving forward. Um, but what does this have to do with the Circle Jerks? Wonderful? Nothing really, but kind of. In the fall of 1984, I decided to do a fanzine called One Step Forward. My first issue was a handful of record reviews, live reviews, and just terrible grammar. Um, this is it right here. I have 2 copies. Um, the worst thing is, I sold this for 75 cents outside of shows. So, was I going to shows with like a pocket full of quarters, hoping, people would give me $1 bills? Um, and it's the usual like pictures that I took of, I didn't take that one. My friend Andy Fritz uh, took these pictures. 45 Grave, Mike Muir from Suicidal Tendencies, obviously. Vicious Circle, a great band from Rhode Island, and who I thought was Roger Rogerson from the Circle Jerks. Turned out to not be him. So yeah, fanzine, terrible. Um, you will not get a copy of this. In December of 1984, December 29th, the Circle Jerks played the Paradise in Boston with the Idle Rich, a Rhode Island band, and Verbal Assault. And at the time, late 1984, there was, still a lot of gas in the Boston hardcore scene, obviously. But some of these bands from, Rhode Island and Connecticut that were coming up were pretty great. Like those two and, Vicious Circle, who I had the picture of in the zine there. So my friend and I went to this show. We brought one of those tape recorders that was, like had a handle on it. I'm sure I'll probably Google it and find a picture and I'll put it up in the thing here. You'll see it. See? Oh, I know, right? Look at that. Yeah, I know. Look at it. So we brought that to the show, which in retrospect, what a pain in the fucking ass that must have been. And our idea was to find Keith Morris either, before the show or after and ask him if he would do an interview. And I don't remember exactly how it went down, but he, you know, agreed to do it and, just said, meet me at the bottom of this staircase. This is at the Paradise in Boston. There's a staircase on the side of the stage that leads up to the backstage area that's been there for, I think it's still there as far as I know. Um, the interview was pretty amateur. The most interesting question was probably me asking, how they came up with the skanking kid. I just turned 15, and aside from the tape recorder not recording the thing, and me referring to who I found out later was like today was actually Xander Schloss, but at the time I thought it was Roger Rogerson. But shortly thereafter, I realized it wasn't. So for the longest time, I thought it was Earl Liberty, who was in Saccharin Trust and was in the Circle Jerks briefly. But he had quit in April of 1984, and this show was in December. And the only reason I thought that this was Earl Liberty is, and this is the picture I took. It's terrible, but he doesn't have glasses on like Xander Schloss. So I don't know. I thought it was a real liberty. I've never seen a picture of Xander Schloss without glasses. But I'll keep looking, and it's, again, if I find one, I'll put it in the thing here, and you'll see it. See, yeah, oh yeah, look at this one. Um, anyway, my point with all of this is, at 15 years old, this night and after this, I had no problem approaching, Pete Stahl from Scream, Reed Mullen from COC, who I interviewed in the COC van with Brian Walsby, who had been touring with them at the time. And that was pretty, being in COC's van, like around the Animosity era, talking to those guys. Uh, Mike Dean, pokes his head in. When I think about that now, that's, like to some people, if, they got to be sitting in the, in the fucking Beatles recorded Abbey Road or something, it's like a big deal. Where were you in 1985? Um, Kenny from Marginal Man. I interviewed Lyle Pressler, who, on behalf of the Meatmen, I went over Chris Doherty from Gangrene's house and interviewed him. So, so I had no problem with, approaching these guys to do interviews. And for whatever reason now, um, that doesn't happen. Oh yeah, I also Scott from Scared Straight, who went on to become a professional baseball player. I think maybe with the Chicago White Sox. I think he was a pitcher, and he had that band 10-foot pole maybe. No, they were a great band, one of the Mystic bands. I was a big fan of all that stuff at the time. So anyway, I apologize if you came here to hear about the Circle Jerks album, Wonderful, in wandering around the smoky crater of my mind here while you sit there twiddling on your phone because you're wondering when I'm going to actually talk about this fucking record. Um, so yeah, the Circle Jerks, at this point, the last album was in 1983, Golden Shower Hits, and the last song on that record is um, the medley, Golden Shower Hits, that ends with Divorce. It's the medley of the 70 songs. It tells like a love story, and the so I have this thing I always think about, like if this happened to you, like in real time, if you were like, here's an example: the last song on an album, and then the first song on the next record, especially if you experience this in real time. A good example of this would be, and I unfortunately did not experience this, would be the Misfits' "Walk Among Us." The last song on that album is "Brain Eaters," which, you know, not arguably, is probably the worst song on that album. It's not a bad song. It's just it's the worst song on that album. Um, but it's a perfect, campy ending to this album full of, catchy songs about, violence in many forms. So, it's a fucking classic album. So imagine you're a fan of the Misfits, and that's the last, record you hear. That's the one you've been playing for, a year, 2 years, or whatever. The time period was between those two records. I think it was only like a year or a year and a half. And then you get Earth AD, and you get it home and throw it on, and boom, what the fuck is happening here? Did I buy the right record? It sounds like, Discharge made a deal with the devil and, recorded this thing in a sewer or something, Uh, this was actually the first Misfits record I heard. And at this time, my friend Peter and I, who introduced me to punk rock and hardcore, Peter Biebergall, is a writer, good guy. I should probably get him on here again. It would be fun to actually talk about this phenomenon. But we listened to this record, Rudimentary Peanut Death Church, Jerry's Kids, Is This My World, Crass, Christ the album, that box, and then that first Violent Femmes album, which was kind of a whole. The Faith Void record was big, the Flex Your Head record. But we would get high as a kite on, shitty Mexican brickweed, and these records would, just take you to like a weird place, especially this Misfits record, because it's a scary sounding record. I still to this day don't know half of what the lyrics are. My friends and I have ongoing, jokes about some of the lyrics on this, which are, we've had text and email chains with just, joke lyrics that, because it sounds like he's singing with, a mouthful of dice or something, a mouthful of 20-sided dice. And yeah, so that record is a fucking weird follow up to that. But that I always thought, what can you think of, tell me in the comments what you think would be a, one of those records where the last song on this record was this, and then you hear this next album and it's just like a completely different thing. Black Flag, maybe, from Damage to My War. I don't know. Anyway, so yeah, the last song on that record is that medley, and the next record opens with Wonderful. A song that's filled with all sorts of positive things you could do to the world to make it more wonderful. And I think one of the reasons the Circle Jerks became one of my favorite bands early on was their sense of humor, even when talking about serious stuff. But also just if you've ever met Keith Morris, that's the guy. If you've ever met him or seen any interviews with him or seen how he interacts on stage, he's one of the sweetest guys in the world. So um, I don't think this song is completely tongue in cheek. I think deep down, he's got a little bit of hippie in him. Whether he'd want to admit that is questionable, but he's a good man. There's not many bad stories about Keith Morris out there. So and these guys were like our rock stars, and I saw him at subsequent shows when they would come through Boston, and he always remembered me. And Reed Mullen from COC was also one of these just guys that was he remembered me by name, everything, even years later when they came through with Danzig, um, he never lost that just down to earth vibe about him. Reed Mullen, R.I.P. One of the best drummers and just guys in this world of music. And I'm going to hopefully talk about animosity on this very podcast with a special guest, hopefully soon. This record, Wonderful, seems to get mixed reviews with people. Some think it's the beginning of the end. It's a hard disagree for me. I think the follow-up record has, a few good songs on it. It's not, great, but I think with a lot of these types of bands, it's always like a general consensus that the first record is the best one, and a lot of times though it's the one that you hear first. And for me, Rock for Light was the first Misfits record I ever heard, so that's my favorite record. Is it better than Walk Among Us? Probably not. In the scheme of things, it's probably not as good as Earth AD, but it doesn't represent their, if I was wanted to show someone what the Misfits were all about, I probably would get to that last. I'd probably go with the Legacy of Brutality comp or any of those collections. Always have a good mix. But this record as a whole, hearing it as the first record, and then if you heard, Walk Among Us, if doing that backwards, it's a weird, it's a harsh toke. The Bad Brains, Rock for Light, I heard that first. So, for me, I like it better than the demo. And same thing, is it better than the demo? I don't know. They both have their ups and downs. And I think a lot of times, and there's probably a lot of group sex purists out there who, you know, and I agree with this a lot of the times where a lot of these bands, the first album is the general consensus is this is the best one, and then it only goes down from here. And and I guess ones I would put in that category would be Group Sex, Still Screaming by Scream, Victim in Pain by Agnostic Front, Damaged maybe by Black Flag. And I'm talking debut albums. I know that some of these bands have singles, so don't at me. I know about the AF singles. I don't have one, but I know that it existed. So yeah, Wonderful is mostly great. all the way through. A couple of okay songs, and there's that song at the end, "Another Broken Heart for Snake." That's just kind of whatever. The songwriting credits on this record are weird. Xander has 7 songwriting credits to Greg Hetson's 4, and if you go back to the early, if you go through the Circle Jerks catalog, he doesn't actually have that many credits. He did the arrangement for "Wasted," the Black Flag song. I guess Keith took the lyrics back to the Circle Jerks with him. Is that how that worked? And I like both versions. Tell me in the comments which one you like better. He wrote "Live Fast, Die Young" and "Red Tape," which is probably the best Circle Jerk song there is. Maybe, right? Yeah, it is. Especially the drums. So I'm not saying he hasn't contributed. In Golden Shower Hits, he worked on it. He wrote a lot of stuff on that. And the songs on the record, my favorites on here are "Mrs. Jones," which is about your neighbors in suburbia who I related to that pretty well. I've pretty much lived in suburban areas most of my life, and I imagine she's married to Bob Dylan's Mr. Jones. It's the same kind of disposition there. Fireball, I love the crowd, and Karma Stew, I like a lot, and the sort of over the top bigger songs on here, and I only say that as when they played them live, it was always sort of like a production, like "Killing for Jesus." Keith Morris did the crucifixion thing on stage, and then American Heavy Metal Weekend was always a fun one, and Making the Bombs was always fun, and those are like very classic Circle Jerk songs, witty, funny, dark humor, and tongue in cheek. And the song "Killing for Jesus," though, is written by 3 guys. I forgot their names at this point, but they're from the research I did. They were from a band called Megadeth. That was spelled Death, from Flint, Michigan. But the more I dug around, it seems that it's actually a fake band, and it might just be the Circle Jerks under a different name. If you know anything about that, let me know, because I spent way more time than I needed to trying to figure that out tonight, and I forgot to feed my cat because I was literally in here like and you're trying to search Megadeth spelled like that. It keeps showing you, Dave Mustaine with the red hair and stuff. And who wants to see that? And I spent a lot of time with this record, and the label that put this out, Combat Core. I was a big fan of that record from that label. It was an arm of Relativity that was putting out a lot of stuff I loved at the time, because they were doing a lot of the metalish hardcore stuff. Crumb Suckers, E-Trope, which I pronounced Zoetrope for the first 57 years of my life. Agnostic Front, Possessed, Murphy's Law had stuff on there, Venom, and a ton more. And it was a good label, and a lot of the records on that label will probably end up on episodes on this channel at some point, because they're all pretty huge records to me. So yeah, if you haven't heard this record in a long time, or if you've never heard it, throw it on. Right now there's I don't know what your situation is, but for a lot of people, there's a lot of not so wonderful things happening in the world right now. So this album gives you 35 minutes away from that, and it brings you to that wonderful place that I think you deserve to be in. So yeah, thanks for watching. Good to see you.